During the Great Depression, unemployment and poverty were widespread, and today it's widely assumed that resulted in a generally unclean population. However, the fact that many were forced to live in unsanitary conditions actually turned the Depression into a period of innovation for personal hygiene. The effects on business, industry, and people's personal finances were nothing short of devastating. But when it came to hygiene, it was more of a mixed bag. So, today we're going to take a look at what hygiene was like during the Great Depression. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other hygiene-related topics you would like to hear about. Toothbrushes had already existed for centuries, but during the Great Depression, they underwent massive changes. Prior to the 30s, toothbrushes could be anything from a stick rubbed on one's teeth to a bunch of boar bristles collected for the same purpose. But DuPont de Nemours changed all of that in 1938 when the chemical company developed the first toothbrush with nylon bristles. Marketed as Dr. West's Miracle Toothbrush, DuPont's product improved on pretty much every aspect of the old models. It cleaned better, lasted longer, cost less, and its marketing contributed to an increased public awareness of oral hygiene. Simultaneously promoting patriotism and consumerism, the advertisements reminded women that oral health was essential to maintaining the home front during World War II. Soldiers fighting in the conflict were also given toothbrushes, and they continued to brush their teeth once they returned home. In the drought-plagued parts of the United States known as the Dust Bowl, layers of dirt and grime could be found on everything. Dust made its way into homes, stuck to the skin, and often caused breathing difficulties for men, women, and children. Many in states like Oklahoma and Kansas were even forced to leave their homes, but some tried to tough it out. Caroline A. Henderson and her family remained on their Oklahoma farm. In a letter to a friend on the East Coast, she described the measures they had to take to deal with pervasive dust, which, in her own words, penetrates wherever air can go. These measures included wearing shade hats, tying handkerchiefs over their faces, and lining their nostrils with Vaseline. The family also took to keeping oiled cloth on their windowsills in an attempt to collect the dust as it entered their home. Though, according to Caroline, no method was fully effective. The grime didn't only affect the lives of the people of Oklahoma, according to the New York Times. The dust even reached the Big Apple itself in May of 1934 and lodged itself in the eyes and throats of weeping and coughing New Yorkers. Tampons were not invented during the Great Depression. In fact, the concept goes back to the ancient world, where women in places like Egypt, Greece, and Rome used tampon-like implements made out of papyrus, wool, lint, and other absorbent fibers. During the late 19th century, inserted devices were used to administer treatments to female reproductive organs, but they were rarely used to absorb discharges, much less blood. The 1920s saw the development of Kotex sanitary napkins, which were cleaner and more convenient than using rags, and could meet the needs of working, traveling, and elegant women alike. Then, during the subsequent 2 decades, expanding academic and media interest in menstruation opened larger conversations about women's hygiene, and even more new technologies began to be developed. Modern tampons were created by Dr. Earl Haas in the early 1930s. Haas's device was made out of cotton that could be inserted with an applicator. Cotton was eventually replaced by synthetic rayon. And in 1936, Tampax was born. Owned by Gertrude Tenderich, the Tampax Sales Corporation advertised in newspapers and magazines throughout the late 1930s. In the 1940s, an alternative tampon hit the market, the non-applicator version. They were branded as OB, which was an abbreviation of the German phrase ohne Binde, meaning without napkins. Tampons were advertised as providing freedom to women while eliminating hazards, risks, embarrassment, even humiliation. Most everyone knows that Lysol is a popular disinfectant that's useful for keeping a household clean. But during the 1920s, it was also associated with maintaining clean relationships. A woman who used Lysol as a douche was said to be protecting her health, while simultaneously maintaining her youth for the good of her marriage. As a bonus, since douching was a common method of birth control at the time, Lysol was also believed to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Advertisers played into fears about feminine hygiene, but also depicted women who used Lysol as successful and responsible wives and mothers. The implication was the cleaner's germ-eliminating properties could also wipe out sperm. Unfortunately, when used this way, the harsh chemicals in Lysol usually just resulted in pain, inflammation, and sometimes even proved deadly. And of course, Lysol was pretty much ineffective at preventing pregnancy. One research study conducted in 1933 found that almost half of the women who used Lysol as a contraceptive became pregnant. Who'd have thought? Advertisers making questionable claims. As a result of the Great Depression, millions of people living in cities found themselves unemployed or underemployed. Many of those cities stopped migrants from coming in, arguing that they would only add to unemployment and the burden of providing relief to the unemployed. It was also believed those migrants would spread disease and increase crime rates. While the health of the general population improved during the Great Depression, many families couldn't afford medical care or lived in such squalor that they couldn't escape disease. In shantytowns, or Hoovervilles, as they were called in mocking honor of President Herbert Hoover, hastily crafted tents and shacks were crammed together, without access to clean water. Garbage collected around the residence, and inadequate facilities for cooking and sleeping contributed to overall poor health. Concern over the spread of communicable diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, pneumonia, and syphilis even led to several public health initiatives. But they didn't help everyone. When former loom tender LMA Wiggins couldn't afford medical care for her 5 children, 4 of them perished from whooping cough. The emphasis on cleanliness during the Great Depression in advertising campaigns and public health initiatives eventually started to affect how men viewed their own faces. Razor and shaving cream manufacturers targeted businessmen, claiming that men would be more employable, more successful, and more appealing with a hair-free face. A connection was drawn between shaving and employment, and in large part that advertising-based connection survives to this very day. The idea that clean-shaven men were more employable than bearded ones was largely fostered in campaigns like the ones the Brisk Company used in the 1930s. Their ads stated that job candidate Brown should get the job over candidate Smith because Smith lacks the appearance due to his unshaven face. Similarly, the Gillette Company advertised that taking the chance to skip a shave now and then could put a man's livelihood at risk. Shaving was becoming big business, and in 1931, Schick cashed in by introducing the electric razor, which was alleged to make shaving even easier and quicker. During the 1920s and 1930s, advertising turned bad breath into halitosis. The term lent the condition a much more official and serious distinction that could jeopardize one's social status and health. Listerine, developed as an antiseptic during the last years of the 19th century, transitioned to an over-the-counter item in the 1910s. It even functioned as an alcoholic beverage during the 1920s, though we don't recommend drinking Listerine for that reason today. Robitussin, on the other hand. No, don't do that. Listerine mouthwash was marketed as a cure for halitosis, an ailment that could not only prevent someone from getting a job, but also lead to a woman's perpetual spinsterhood. With the headline, "Always a bridesmaid, never a bride," the implication for women was clear. Without fresh breath, you were doomed to a life of loneliness and sorrow. In light of those prospects, many women didn't want to take any chances, and the product took off. During the 1930s, deodorant and antiperspirant companies began advertising to male customers. In contrast to traditional views that manliness was tied to sweat and hard work, companies like Top Flight played on male fears of body odor in the ever-tenuous workplace. So if that guy in the cubicle next to you doesn't smell like BO, thank Top Flight. It's weird to think there was a time when there was no such thing as a laundromat. It actually wasn't until 1934 when Fort Worth, Texas businessman J.F. Cantrell opened what he called a washateria that the first laundromat was born. Wish we'd kept the name washateria. That's pretty fantastic. Washing machines were expensive, as was the electricity required to run them. So the innovative businessman installed 4 machines in one building and offered them for use at an hourly fee. 2 years later in Buffalo, New York, Lars Edstrom opened a similar establishment, this time providing coin-operated laundry services. Like so many Depression-era products, laundromats capitalized on the social stigma of dirt and a lack of cleanliness as it related to unemployment. Their widespread use also negatively impacted commercial laundries, an industry that had already taken a hit from the sales of in-home washing machines during the 1920s. This only worsened as consumers learned to use washing machines at laundromats, and washing machines became increasingly available to consumers through installment plans. Soap was readily available during the Great Depression, and thankfully, it was relatively affordable. As soap became that item that most people couldn't go without, companies like Colgate-Palmolive Peet thrived. Their advertising campaigns saw massive growth in multiple forms of media, and their advertisements on the radio were heard by millions. Companies like Procter & Gamble, Lever Brothers, and others became prominent sponsors of plot-driven, dramatic entertainment aimed at female audiences, which became known as soap operas. If you couldn't afford soap, making it at home was also an option. This was done by combining lard with lye, vinegar, water, and any fragrances one could find. Homemade soap was used to wash clothes, dishes, and bodies alike. Many women made soap for their families or sold it for extra money. So what do you think? Is depression hygiene not as bad or worse than you expected? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.